It is a scam when you don't allow everyone to operate on fair terms.
We are the Robin Hoods of sports betting. We take something back from the rich bookies and enable our customers to beat them instead.
G'day everyone, welcome along to episode 9 of Sunday Streams with TradeMate Sports, where we answer your betting questions, discuss both new and old betting strategies, how to best use the TradeMate Sports software, and welcome on guests from around the betting industry. And as you can see, it's one of those episodes where we welcome on a guest from around the betting industry, as I welcome on Dan Abrams. How are you, mate?
Great, Alex. How are you?
Very, very good. Now, mate, why don't we just kick things off? You're going to go through quite a few things today. You're going to basically take me back to school, and I'm going to look like a child learning maths for the first time probably today. I'm going to look very, very stupid, I think, for most of this. But maybe you want to, just explain a little bit about yourself so people, can get familiar with your background and how you got to this point where you're writing superb, very complicated articles.
Okay. Well, I've been, an amateur poker player for many, many years. I did a bunch of analysis of a game called Raz years ago, which is this weird variant, nothing like No Limit Hold'em that most people play. But I did a whole bunch of mathematical analysis on it and wrote a lot of articles about that, did some training videos and that sort of thing. And then recently in America, we got legalized sports betting operators and poker outlets, a lot of which are joined together. So I started playing poker again a little bit more, and as I was waiting for games to crop up, I would start looking at the sports bets and see all the bonus, the odds boost that they would have and the special bets, and try to figure out what sort of where the plus EV spots were in those kind of bets. So I started to kind of get into it that way. And I got talking to some of my friends because I had a bet on the U.S. Open golf tournament last year where there was a promotional bet. So I just picked a name out of a hat. Dustin Johnson, sure, he sounds pretty good. I'll bet on him to win. And I don't know if you or the audience remembers, but he went out to a big lead and had a 4-stroke lead going into the final Sunday. And so I got a little nervous because this was going to be like a $500 payout. And at the time, that was a big part of my sports betting bankroll. And I was thinking, maybe I should hedge off some or all of this. I don't know. And my friends were telling me, no, it's lame to hedge. You're probably going to have to give up some EV to do it. And why would you want to do that? You've walked into a gold mine here. Just, let it ride and see what happens. So luckily, I took their advice at the time, and he went on to win. But I started thinking about it some more, and I was like, if somebody offered me a cash out opportunity for exactly what I would expect the expected value of that ticket would be, wouldn't it be worth taking that amount of money? If he was like 60% to win and it was a $500 cash in for the ticket, if somebody offered me $300, wouldn't it be worth taking that? And of course, the answer is yes, right? You would certainly rather have $300 in sure money, in certain money, than $300 EV. But I started thinking, what if somebody offered me $299 instead, or $298? Wouldn't that be worth taking to have a little bit, give up a little bit of EV in order to have that certainty? So I went and started working some of this stuff out for myself mathematically, and found that there's a whole series of principles that I worked out where, in fact, it is worth hedging in order to maximize your expected growth, even if it means giving back some of your expected value. Now, a lot of people are not familiar with the term expected growth. I'm sure most of your audience is familiar with expected value. But expected growth is what, if you use the Kelly criterion, that's what the Kelly criterion is set up to try to optimize, is your expected value, your expected growth, not your expected value. And it turns out that when you're hedging against bets you already have, you may, in fact, do better by placing bets that are minus EV in order to hedge off some of the risk in your existing bet, and that will maximize your expected growth.
Okay. So that's I guess a slight introduction into like your system, and then you've written I guess you've written a few articles about this and lots of other things too. Yeah, maybe we should just go. I got the first time you approached me was because I was on here talking about how I've been using I think 30% Kelly on accumulators,
Right.
and how obviously like if you're putting, I think I was using the example of TradeMate sports bets, so they're always going to be EV 80% of the time, or at least they're going to close EV about 80% of the time. So you put them together, and I was always just letting them, and I have still been just letting them ride out. Sorry. And I guess that that equals a lot of expected value, multiplying two value bets together, and it's probably good to just put it out there early that normally putting bets together and making an accumulator or a parlay is generally a terrible idea, because for the average punter, they're not really that interested in expected value, and they're normally just betting on their favorite team, or they look at Arsenal or Liverpool this week and go, they'll definitely win this weekend, so I'll just put them two together and I'll get some bigger odds. But essentially, as you know, mate, that just multiplies the house's edge against you. It multiplies their margin or their VIG, whatever you want to call it, together, and then the expected value is terrible. Basically, it gets even worse. So but if you get two value bets together, it goes the other way. So maybe we should just jump right into your example of the one you sent me. Yes, and Dan did send this to me on, what was it, Thursday or Friday? So this was before the games were played. But it's probably a good example to show anyway, because all these three teams won, but I'm assuming that you might have hedged out anyway. We'll let you run through it, mate. So I'll get the example up on my screen, and you can just basically run through your, whatever we want to call it, accumulator hedging system, or I know you have a nice fancy name for it yourself.
Exactly. Right. So this was an example I put together, tailored for Alex, because I know he loves football, that we call soccer, and he loves Arsenal. So I looked for some matches that were going on this weekend that would make a good example. And I copied down the actual pinnacle odds that were on the board, I think on Thursday, for all the matches. Okay. So you can see under the team, I have Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, and then for the Madrid parlay, that's just if you were to parlay the two of those both to win together. And then I added in under that Arsenal, and then the 3-team parlay if you were going to parlay all of them together. And for the hedge column, that's was the handicap bet to bet on the other side plus a half goal. So if it was a draw or the other side won, then the hedge bet would cash. So we weren't really actually ever talking about doing a hedge with either Real Madrid or Atletico Madrid, because they were playing Saturday, and the idea was, what if we set up a 3-team parlay, and if the first 2 legs win, then you hedge against your bet on the third leg and see if that produces better results in the long run than doing it your standard way and letting it ride. Yeah. So I calculated the fair odds. That's the next column there. I calculated the fair odds just based on the pinnacle odds that were listed. And then for the softbook odds, I just made them up, completely made them up. But I did it in such a way that it would form just a little bit of an arbitrage opportunity. They were that good that you would get a little bit of an arbitrage, but not enough that would be super tempting to just do an arbitrage.
Okay, so So right now we're at the stage where, both the Madrid teams have won, and
Right.
so now you're presented with the opportunity of I could let it ride and watch the Arsenal game, which has already been played, and Arsenal have won, and win the whole bet, or you could either hedge off the Madrid bet hedge off the Arsenal bet and give yourself a sure win. So do you want to? I assume you've hedged it off, and maybe you want to explain that whole process that you go through.
Yeah, exactly. So if you start out staking it according to what you would normally do, if you look at the 3-team parlay row, you go across to the Kelly column. That's what the Kelly criterion would say that you should stake on that 3-team parlay. It's about 4%. So if you're doing half Kelly, you would have bet 2.1%. If you're doing a third Kelly, it'd work out to about 1.6%, 1.7. So if you're just doing normally, that's what you would do, and then you would let it ride. Or you would have the option to go ahead and hedge against the Arsenal bet once the first two win. Now, typically what is going to happen is the odds that you get to hedge are not going to be good enough to give you actually neutral EV on that hedge. You'll have to typically do it with a slight amount of negative EV. So if you work out the calculations to how much you should hedge off, what happens is you end up hedging off most of your potential winnings, but not all of them. So it depends on, how much margin is actually built into that line, but it's typically around 70 or 80% of the winnings you lock up, and the rest you let it ride. And that's the optimal amount. But if you plan ahead of time and say, okay, I know if both Madrids win, that I'm going to hedge against Arsenal, what happens is you can bet more initially and then hedge out your risk of the Arsenal match if the first two teams win, and get roughly the same amount of risk, but a lot more expected value, because like you said, you kind of add together the edges of each of the matches and build up a pretty big edge in a 3-team parlay like this. But of course, it's that much riskier. You have to win all 3 games. Well, with this technique, you only have to win the first 2 games, and then the last game you give back a little bit of your edge, but you still maintain most of it. So that's why I call it the neutral hedge gambit. It's a gambit because you're taking a little bit of a risk that you can get a neutral hedge, neutral EV hedge for that last match. Now, if you're betting on Pinnacle, typically they're going to have pretty low margin type of odds for you to hedge against that final match. But even if you're not, if you have a good assortment of outs that you can pick from, you'll usually be able to find a odds somewhere that run pretty close to neutral EV for that final match. So what I did was I made a little graph at the bottom as to what kind of expected growth you can get from either staking at a half Kelly size initially and just letting it ride, full Kelly size, half of what the neutral hedge gambit would say that you should bet, and betting the full neutral hedge gambit. And so I set it up this way on purpose with kind of like the 3D bars, because I thought of an analogy to this process versus something like building actual physical buildings. Okay. Say that's your business. You build office buildings, and you can only build them so tall without worrying about adding extra supports to make sure they don't topple over. Okay, so we're going to say for the half Kelly method, which is the short building on the left, it's not tall enough to have to worry about these extra supports to keep it from toppling over. Okay, it's the amount of risk that you're typically willing to handle. So for the next one, for the full Kelly, that's a little unstable. And as anybody who's ever bet using full Kelly amounts using the typical simple Kelly formula can tell you, it's going to bring a lot of variance. As a matter of fact, in this case, for this 3-team parlay, it would say bet 4% of your bankroll, and you're only ever going to cash maybe 20% of the time, because even though they're all favorites, you know, the chance that all three would win was somewhere around 20%. So that's going to bring an awful lot of variance and a lot of risk. So typically, you know, the solution that people have come up with is, well, I'll just bet less. I'll bet half Kelly or a third Kelly, and that reduces my risk, so I don't have to worry about it. But it also reduces your expected value and your expected growth. What I figured out is that if you use this neutral hedge gambit and you plan on hedging out that final match if given the chance, you can reduce your risk at the end, but still gain a lot of the expected value at the front end. And that's what the third building represents. Is this is if you bet 4% initially, as if you were going to bet full Kelly, but you're going to hedge out on Arsenal. You're going to hedge that Arsenal bet if the first two win. And it's the equivalent of building a taller building that's very unstable, but you add this extra structural support. And that's a little bit of an extra cost, but you still come out way ahead. And the heights of all these buildings here are gauged to the expected growth that you get from each technique. And I set it up so that the half Kelly is at 100%. So you don't have to look at any weird numbers here. This is all compared to what you would get from half Kelly. So if you were going to grow your bankroll by a certain amount using half Kelly, you could grow it by 133% of that by using full Kelly, but take a lot more risk. If you use this neutral hedge gambit and you only bet half of what it tells you to bet, you would get about the same amount of risk as the half Kelly, except you would have 175% of the expected growth. So almost double. And if you were willing to take a little bit more variance and a little bit more risk and do the full neutral hedge gambit, you would get more than twice the expected growth by doing it that way. But you're going to take a lot of variance.
Yeah. So if I had to really simplify this, like you are basically staking, in this case, a 3-team parlay, you're staking it for 2 legs, if you get what I mean. And then, so you got a three leg parlay, and you're basically saying, I mean, to me, I couldn't care less about the third one. This is all about trying to win the first 2 legs. And then, and I'm staking it as if it is just 2 legs.
Exactly. Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Now, it kind of brings up the question, well, why not just bet the first 2 legs in the first place and not add in the third leg? And there's several reasons why you may not want to do that. First is, a lot of times you can get promotional deals where you put together a 3-team parlay and they'll give you a boost on your odds. That's even better.
Yeah.
But even if you can't, the fact that you are betting them all together, like you talked about, you're stacking the edge one on top of the other. Okay. And what I'm talking about with like this cost of hedging is like the cost of putting in a structural support on that building, but it's a fixed cost. It's the same cost whether you put it on a tall building or a short building. So it doesn't make sense when you're doing a short building, right? If you put 3 short buildings together and you bet each one individually, or you do a 2-team parlay, it just doesn't make sense mathematically to add in that extra structural support. But when you build a tall tower like that, you take a little bit of extra money, you put it in on that structural support, and now you hedge down your risk and you get much more reward.
Yeah. And so when you get to the situation where Real Madrid and Atletico have both won, are you staking Arsenal, or you're hedging out the Arsenal bet in a way that makes it that you're going to win equal amounts no matter what team wins from there on, or are you staking it in a way that optimizes your EV?
That is a great question. You're doing a third thing. You're staking in a way that optimizes your EG, your expected growth. So
Right.
in the first article I did, I show a very simple formula that is basically the same as the Kelly criterion plus a little extra factor at the end that I called the hedge factor. And when you add that in to figure out how much you should be staking, that tells you how to optimally stake your hedges so that you do get the optimum expected growth. Now, if you're lucky enough and you can find a odds somewhere that'll allow you to do a hedge that's exactly neutral EV. It's not plus, it's not minus, it's exactly fair odds. Then you would hedge enough to make the outcome even on both sides. If it's slightly negative EV, you'll hedge out most of your risk. You'll lock in, 70 to 80% of your profits, and the rest you'll let it ride.
Okay, very interesting. Because I guess most people would approach that last leg and just think, all right, I'm just going to now make sure that no matter what, I win, $100 on either side, or I'm not going to try and win 150 on one side and $20 on the other, something like that. That's just off the top of my head, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Would you say overall that when you get to that situation when you are hedging out, that you are saying that we're going for the most optimal expected growth situation, but would you also say that it's a plus EV bet, or do you think like the whole bet itself turns out to be a negative EV bet, or how do you look at that?
No, the whole bet will definitely be plus EV.
Okay.
Because in cases like in this example, I didn't actually put in a column that lays out the edge, but you can kind of figure out what the edge is on each one, because I give the Kelly percentage, right? So the Kelly percentage is just your edge over your odds. And these are slight favorites. Decent sized favorites, actually. So the edges on each one of these is about a 10% edge. So it's a pretty big edge. So you've got 3 bets that you make at 10% edges, and then you're hedging out on the last one, and you might have to have like a minus 2% edge or a minus 3% edge on that hedge bet. So even though you're staking a lot more money into that hedge bet, you still end up overall very, very plus EV.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, mate. So if I'm at the situation where Real and Atletico have won and I'm looking to hedge out the Arsenal bet, how do I go about figuring out the best, way to stake it for optimal bankroll growth? Do you have some kind of formula that people can follow, or is it quite easy just to do off the top of your head?
It's pretty easy. It's just you would take out a regular Kelly criterion calculator. You'd punch in the probability that you think, of your the hedge bet winning, not of Arsenal winning anymore, right? Because you're betting against Arsenal. So I forget who were they facing? Brighton, I think. Right?
Brighton, yeah.
Right. So you would be betting Brighton plus a half, right? So if Brighton wins or draws, you win the hedge bet. So you would be betting Brighton plus a half, and you would figure out on your Kelly calculator what the normal Kelly fraction is going to be. And since it's going to be a minus EV bet, then it's going to come out with a minus Kelly number for that. But you're going to add an extra factor to that. And that extra factor is the probability that your hedge bet will win times the payout that you're going to get from your overall parlay as a fraction of your bankroll. So say the parlay payout would be like 20% of your bankroll, because, it's a decent size odds. And the probability that Brighton would draw or win is 50%. So this extra factor is now 50% of 10%, I'm sorry, 50% of 20%, which works out to be 10%. So whatever you calculate your normal Kelly fraction to be, maybe -2%, -3%, you add 10% on top of that, and you get 7 or 8%. And that's what you stake for the hedge bet. Very, very simple.
All right. Well, there we go. Hopefully that gives people an idea of how to actually implement this. I think like the first question
We can
had.
put that in the show notes too. We can add that into the show notes later if you want, Alex. But it's in my first article as well.
Okay, terrific. I think one of my first questions for all of this was like when we first met and talked about this was so what happens if Real Madrid lose or Atletico lose? Essentially, you're staking this bigger than if I was doing 30% Kelly, half Kelly, whatever. You're essentially staking this 3-team parlay bigger than you would if you were doing the Kelly criterion. So
yes,
as we know, Real Madrid can lose, Atletico can lose. So I think most people will probably be like very questionable about this and think, all right, well, what happens if Real Madrid lose? Then I'm going to lose like whatever. I don't know if you do the full neutral hedge gambit or you do half, but either way, you're losing a pretty decent chunk of your bankroll.
Yeah, you are. You're definitely putting up more of your bankroll each time, but it's worth it because if if each of the sides are roughly going to win 70% of the time, the overall chance that the first two will win and you'll get to do your hedge is about 50-50, right? But the overall chance of the whole accumulator winning is only about 35%. So you're talking about these are your two alternatives. One, you stake a smaller amount and you only win 35% of the time, you lose 65% of the time. Or you stake a larger amount, you win 50% of the time and hedge off a little bit of value in doing that. And the other 50% of the time you just lose outright. But mathematically it works out to be the best way to grow your bankroll. And I know you guys were talking last week about, how when you use the TradeMate system, if you really are staking on a percentage basis, you should see this kind of exponential growth. And that's really the whole point of the Kelly criterion and this larger kind of field of investigation that I'm going into now, which I call the theoretical Kelly optimization, or TKO. Because there are many, many situations that, the regular simple Kelly criterion does not anticipate. It wasn't designed to cover them, but the methodology of maximizing your expected growth can be applied to all sorts of situations just like this.
Yeah. And so just to rehash this, you would say that over a larger sample size, so let's just say, because obviously there's a lot of variance involved in just staking Kelly and letting it ride. Let's just say we've got a sample of like 10,000 Kelly accumulators or whatever. Obviously over that time, or very much likely, you're going to obviously have accumulated a lot of EV, but you should be well out on top in terms of just straight profits. If I did 10,000 bets of just letting it ride versus 10,000 bets of using your system of optimizing for expected growth, who would you say would win in the long term?
Definitely maximizing for expected growth.
Yeah.
And the reason is because the way you grow your bankroll the fastest is by building win on top of win and increasing your actual stakes, because as you win more and more, when you bet 2%, that 2% represents more and more money.
Yeah.
Right. So, you can go with a more traditional method where you're just trying to focus on expected value. But the expected value in actual dollars is really not the what you want to be maximizing. And if you think about it in the extreme, you see a parlay opportunity like this where you've got a 10% edge on Real Madrid and 10% on Atletico and 10% on Arsenal, and you can put them all together in a parlay. And if the sports book would let you bet any amount you wanted, how would you maximize your EV? How much of your bankroll would you bet?
Well, I mean, it depends. Oh, I mean, it just depends on people's risk, isn't it? And whether they want to blow their bankroll or not. But obviously, most people want to. I mean, we tell people that no matter how big the EV is, no matter what the odds, that your max bet should only maybe be 2, maybe in extreme circumstances, 3%.
Right. Because you're concerned with risk, and you're right to do that. But if you were to take somebody who's never bet on sports before and sit them down and say, okay, here are the odds, here are the percentages, now maximize your expected value on this bet. They could go through the process and come out with the answer, and the answer will always be bet 100% of your bankroll. That's how you maximize your EV. Of course, you laugh because that's ridiculous, and even if you win the first time, eventually you're going to lose and you're going to be broke.
Yeah.
But that really is maximizing your expected value. Now, if you wanted to minimize your risk, how much should you bet? If the only thing you were worried about was minimizing your risk, how much would you bet?
2 to 3%.
Okay. That's a good answer, except I could do you one better. I could say you bet 0%. That minimizes your risk. You can't possibly lose anything if you bet 0%, right?
That's a good point. Never thought of that.
Right. So, I mean, you guys are doing it the smart way. You're looking at things in terms of percentages, and you're basing it off the Kelly criterion. And the Kelly criterion is saying this is how you maximize your expected growth. And what that really is doing is it's finding that equilibrium point between getting more EV and getting less risk.
Yeah.
Right? Either of the extremes is ridiculous. One, you never bet anything, and the other, you're guaranteed to lose eventually. So you got to find that equilibrium in between, and that's what maximizing your expected growth does.
Yeah, it's a fabulous system, mate. I'm sure people are very, very interested. I think the best way I can tell by people are very interested is no one's dared even send any questions in yet.
I'm going to ask for my money back for all the people I paid to ask questions at this. So.
Exactly. Okay, I've got a few more just I guess finite questions around the whole topic. So would you ever have a situation where you'd try and hedge out? I mean, I know this is probably a really stupid question because it's very, very hard to do, and maybe it overcomplicates the process. But let's just say Real Madrid were playing on Saturday, Atletico Sunday, and then Arsenal Monday. Would you ever get a situation where you'd start hedging out after the first game when you've still got 2 legs left?
That is not a stupid question. That is actually a great question.
Never heard that
before. No, it's a great question because I've asked it myself and I couldn't answer it. You would think, of course, there's a certain amount of risk that you could take out by hedging against Atletico once Real Madrid has won and not wait to see if they've won or not. And that's something that I'm working on right now. And I'm going to give you a little scoop here, Alex, that I think I'm going to hold off on that and turn it into a book and write a book on it.
Oh, look at that. Love it. Love it. That's very, very cool. My next question was, should people, I think I've already asked you this before, but is the optimal scenario for these parlays to have smaller odds in the first leg? Would you say that improves your expected growth, or it doesn't really matter? It doesn't matter in terms of, I could have 3.3 in odds for the first leg and 1.2 for the second leg. Does that matter? Like what order the odds come in?
It doesn't matter as to whether or not the technique of the neutral hedge gambit will work. It'll work either way. What it does change is how much how much more you should be willing to bet initially in order to capitalize on it. So the longer your odds of the first leg, the less of a multiplier you're going to want to attach to your bet sizing. So the longer odds, instead of betting twice as much, you only might want to bet 1.5x as much initially, roughly speaking. But that's something that can be figured out more exactly depending on the odds.
Okay, but you're saying overall that it doesn't really, like in terms of my long-term results or long-term expected bankroll growth, it doesn't matter at all, like what order the odds are coming in or, how big the odds are. Like over time, this will make you money.
Yes, it will. Now, I think it does typically work better if you're using favorites because, like you said, you want to keep variance to a reasonable amount. And if you're going to parlay 3 long shots together, you're only going to win the overall parlay maybe 5% of the time and only get to that last leg in order to hedge out of it maybe 20% of the time or 15% of the time. So it's going to put a lot more variance in there. And because of the favorite long shot bias, you're typically paying more of the margin by betting on long shots than you are by betting on the favorites. So that's going to kind of limit the edge that you can expect to get on each of the legs. But the technique, it will work either way. It just may say, okay, only bet a little bit more than you normally would and hedge out a lot more than you would expect to from this example, if you're doing it in terms of 3 long shots.
Okay. We do have some questions coming through. I'll just get them up now. So Gambling Fan, I know you sent this at the start, but I just wanted to get us off to a bit of a running start with what Dan was saying. But he said, if I backed McGregor to beat Poirier now and backed Poirier to beat McGregor the night before the fight and both beat the closing line, would that be good value bets even if one of the bets lose? Well, yes, I would assume in that case that you would have it depends how you've staked it, but I guess in both cases you've made a value bet, and which is great. But I assume that if you're getting bigger odds than you should get, and if you staked it correctly, then that's probably an arbitrage bet too. So, yes.
Yeah, so that turns out, that would turn out basically to be an arbitrage that's like got a time delay built into it. So instead of, seeing odds on 2 different sports books at the same time where you could bet on one versus the other and get an arbitrage, this would be basically what they call buying back, where because the odds have changed so much, you get an arbitrage opportunity. And if both of them are going to beat the closing lines, then it's optimal to bet both in such a way that you get an exact balance regardless of who wins the fight. But if, for instance, you were going to try to hedge out when with your second bet and you didn't think it was going to beat the closing line, you would probably stake a smaller amount on that, so you still leave a little bit of your plus EV bet to ride and just hedge out part of it.
Yeah, well said. And probably just a little pro tip there for Gambling Fan would be to, if you did find two value bets, would try and not do both of them if that was the case at the same book, because that's probably the easiest way to get yourself banned, is to place 2 value bets on the same event on the same sports book, because then they know you are smart, essentially.
Right.
Connor Houlihan has said in the UK, some sportsbooks give a bonus for winning 5-fold accumulators. I think Bet365 is 5% for 5-fold. I think it actually might even be better than that, Connor. I think I've even said I've had like maybe 4 folds and they've gone up to 10 or 15%. But yeah, essentially saying that no matter, you increase how many bets you've got on there and they increase the percentage of that they will pay you out. How would you calculate hedging with bonuses?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's one of the better reasons to be betting accumulators in the first place, along with what you've said before, Alex, is that you end up looking like a more recreational bettor and less likely to get limited or banned at some of these books. But it's just the only thing you have to figure out is the true percentage that you think you're going to be able to win your parlay versus the odds that are being offered initially, and then figure out what you think the percentage would be for your hedge bet if you're going to hedge out of the final leg or the final fold of the parlay bet. So those are the only 3 things that you need to know in order to figure out this technique. Normally, if you're just doing normal Kelly staking, all you would need to know is the odds for the parlay overall and the chance that you're going to win the parlay overall. To do the neutral hedge gambit, you need one more piece of information, which is what you think the chances will be for the true percentage would be for that last leg of the parlay in order for you to hedge out of it when you get there. But if your 5-fold accumulator is going to be 9.5 in odds without the promotion, and they give you a promotion that's a 10% odds boost, so now you're going to bump it up to 10.5 in odds, something like that. So that's even better.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can get some ridiculous EV, especially on I guess odds if you're multiplying, like, let's just say 2-5 in odds bets together and they're both plus EV, and they can sometimes I mean, that's normally a lot of the time you can see just huge edges on those odds of 5 or 4 or something like that, and you multiply them together and then they put a little power play or something, whatever they want to call it, on top of that, and yeah, I've had some situations where it's a huge edge. My next question was going to be how you're actually finding these plus EV bets, because I guess you're doing this, or I think you sent this to me on Thursday or Friday, so this was maybe 2 or 3 days before the games. Are you just doing it manually and going and checking the Pinnacle odds, finding out the true odds that way, and then doing a bit of searching around sports books yourself, or how are you finding these plus EV bets?
Well, there's a couple of services here that I subscribe to that deal with local sports books. I know you guys have a great service there, but doesn't really cover a lot of the sports books in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I've got an Odds Boom is one service, and Odds Jam, that's another service that find these low hold value bet opportunities and arbitrage opportunities as well. I mean, to be honest, for the example, I just made up the odds at the soft books for the sake of the example, but they're not out of line with things that you might find anyway, where the odds at the soft books are just so far from what Pinnacle's got that you can get very large value on some of these bets.
So I assume you've done this this neutral hedge gambit with 2-leg accumulators, with 3-leg accumulators. Do you ever do more than that, up 4 and above?
I typically don't. There's no reason why you couldn't. But like you said, like you asked me before, I've only worked out the math so far as to what do you do when you get to that last leg. So I really didn't want to get into a whole lot of variance and have to worry about winning the first 3 legs and to get to the 4th. I've typically done it with 2 legs and 3 legs. But I'm working out that math now, and basically what you can do is start hedging down. In other words, hedge down your overall exposure where you're not betting enough to take out, any chance of winning or losing, but you're hedging enough that say you stand to win $500 on the accumulator overall. And if you win the first leg, for example, you might bet $50 to hedge against the second leg. So if you lose, at least you win $80 or something like that. And if you don't, if it goes against your hedge and you win the second leg of the parlay, then you might bet $100 against the third leg. So I'm just making up numbers now, but that's how the technique would work.
Yeah. One of my last questions for you, mate, would be if you've got any, like, your overall results using your method and how it's worked for you. Maybe, I don't know, an ROI, or maybe what your expected bankroll growth is, or whatever. Share how it's gone for you, maybe how long you've been doing it for, and how much success you've had with it.
Yeah, I haven't really put that together because, to be honest with you, I haven't been doing it that long. Like I said, the first time I even started betting sports was last summer. So it hasn't even been a year that I've done anything. And at the time, I was just, messing around doing trivial amounts based off of my poker bankroll. So it's only since I started writing these articles and working out the theory that I started staking it myself. So I don't really have a huge track record of doing it myself, but I've certainly advised other people, and they've done quite nicely.
Yeah. And for people who are listening to this and thinking, all right, I'm going to give this a go, it sounds terrific, what are the next steps they need to put in place? What are, like, the tools, I guess, or the formulas that they would need? Or maybe you just want to direct them to the tools that you use to come up with calculating the stakes for these hedging bets.
Yeah. I mean, I would love it if people would go and read the actual articles that I wrote, and the formulas are all in there, along with an explanation of what I'm doing. It's a lot of math. I understand it's a lot of math, and it's difficult for people. And I try to boil things down as much as possible by the end of the articles, so it's easy for people to do. But what I'll also do is I'll start posting on Twitter some of the basic upshot of just how to go about this. It's really not that hard. If you're familiar with staking any fraction of the Kelly criterion and using a Kelly criterion calculator, it'll be very, very easy for you to do.
Yeah. I've just posted one of your articles in the chat for people to go and check out. I'm not sure whether that's the first article or the second article. But you've written 3 articles for the 2+2 website magazine.
It's 4 articles now that I've done. I think, just looking at the link, I think that's the first one.
Okay.
It's a monthly magazine, so the first one came out in February, the February edition, and I have them in the March, April, and May editions as well.
Okay, well, there you go.
If you go there, you can find the right edition.
Yeah, so if you just go up the top of that page I sent everyone, it'll say, current issue, April issue, March issue, and then, Dan has an article in February, March, April, and May. So,
correct.
Definitely go and check those out. If you're like me, you'll probably have to read them 20 times to understand, because maths was never my strong suit, especially complicated maths. This overall topic's been fascinating, mate. It's been superb getting you on, and I think that's the whole purpose of this show, just like a really relaxed environment to discuss. Yeah, this is really rare that we can talk to someone who's, I guess, introduced a topic or a strategy that's no one's probably heard of before. So I hope that everyone's gotten something out of this today. Maybe just before we head off, mate, you want to let people know where they can find you and if they've got any questions or any other projects that you've got going on. I know you mentioned that you might write a book down the line at some point. So
Yep.
it's a good time to tell people where to find you and all that kind of stuff.
Great. Yeah. You can hit me up on Twitter at Dr. Raz, WSOP. That, I've had that handle for a long time, since long before I was sports betting. Thank you. They can hit me up on Twitter. You can DM me if you want to, ask questions. I mean, if it's just a general question, please do it publicly so other people can see the answer. Like I said, I'm going to work on a book now, including some of the techniques I put in these articles, as well as some new stuff that I'm working on. And I'm going to, when that launches, I'm going to launch a website as well.
That's awesome, mate. I thank you so much for your time. It's really, I guess when I meet people like you and other people in the industry, it's really exciting that it's a great industry, because I think there's lots of people out there who are willing to give up their time and share things that they're working on. And it's always exciting. I don't think that's the case in many industries. That, I mean, you when I first met you, we just jumped on Zoom and you spent an hour explaining this all to me. And oh, mate, I probably asked the same question over and over as I was learning it on the spot. But no, mate, I thank you very much for your time. And yeah, it was really good fun. Before we jump off, I'll just answer one question that's come in from Gambling Fan again. He says, a little bit off topic, but any advice on what football, soccer to bet on during the summer other than MLS? Well, I mean, the good thing is this summer we've got the Euros, you got the Copa America too. I'm not sure if there's a African Cup of Nations or anything like that. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Dan. Maybe you know.
No, sadly, yeah. I know a little bit about soccer at this point from my son, getting him into the Premier League, but other than that, I'm lost.
I think maybe they're playing during the European winter or American winter too. I think there's a tournament there, but I think there'll just be a lot of international football because obviously all the club football's off, but the international football might, if there's no like competition, they might just be friendlies or qualification kind of games. So there should be plenty of stuff to bet on there, Gambling Fan. But in terms of what's best to bet on, it doesn't really matter. It's more so whether there's value there, and not just betting for the fun of it, unless you just want to have fun, I guess.
Exactly. Which
you forget that sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And that's one of the things that I try to stress in my articles, is that just maybe by coincidence, it happens that most of the time if you're hedging against an existing bet to maximize your expected growth, most of the time you're not actually hedging out all of your bet. You're leaving another 10, 20, 30% to ride. So it is fun because you get to root for the original side that you bet on, and you still do better if they win. But if they lose, you're not, left with nothing. Yeah.
No, well said, mate. Anything else you wanted to say before we head off, mate?
No, thank you, Alex. This has been a lot of fun.
All right, terrific. We'll be back next Sunday, of course, at the same time. I think next week I'll probably just be by myself, but I will give you guys a heads up, obviously, a couple of days before, and let you know what we're going to be talking about. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. It'd be great if you've got any more questions for Dan. Maybe you need to watch it a few times just to digest everything and get back to us. But feel free to leave some comments. And if there's any good questions there for Dan, I can let him know, and maybe he can jump back in and answer those, or hit him up on Twitter like he mentioned before. Sure. Thanks for watching. I'll play the little outro video, and we will see you all next week. Cheers, guys.